us some money!
While a metric fuck ton of shit is going on in the real world right now, what better time to partake in some escapism by immersing ourselves in the far more sensible lands of the Boiling Isles? Today we have episode 3 of The Owl House, I Was a Teenage Abomination, which I think is a play on words? Anyway, with how much I enjoyed the first and second episode upon another viewing, I was interested in seeing how my opinion on this one would stack up. I'll admit, I actually skipped this episode by complete accident the first time I was watching the show. I had gone back to watch it after already seeing up to episode 7, I believe, and even then I was only just kinda paying attention. My main takeaway of it was, oh, so that's how Luz met/learned about X, Y, and Z, and not much else. But much like the trash monster that Eda disembowels for loot, there are gems to be found within this episode. For starters, I like this bit.
Wait, is there a magic school here?
No, witches are awarded their staffs from school.
Oh, Luz, you and your slippery mind and/or ADHD. So anyway, we begin, and once again, Luz's faith in her mentor Eda is already being tested. When the life of an independent witch proves to be less than glamorous, once again, she tries to disengage from the situation, which lands her at the doors of Hexside through a series of hijinks. Luckily, this isn't really a retread of the previous episode where Luz gets into trouble trying to retreat to her escapist fantasy again, as the context makes it completely different. In the opening scene, you can kinda see both sides of the situation. On one hand, Eda has proven herself to be a powerful and self-reliant witch by now. She's streetwise, ambitious, and wiser than her lifestyle might suggest. So under normal circumstances, when she tells Luz that she should embrace the wild and unpredictable nature of magic, Luz, and by extension the audience, would be inclined to believe her. On the other hand, she did open this lesson by asking Luz to rummage through a corpse to search for trash that she could sell at her kiosk. So this time Luz cannot necessarily be blamed for wanting to back away from this particular venture. But not before Eda gives her the Chekhov's gun of the episode. So she sets off on her own path for the rest of the runtime, which introduces her to staple characters in future episodes, like the adorably sweet Willow, the charmingly enthusiastic Gus, and the laughably grumpy but surprisingly reasonable Principal Bump. Oh, also there's that one bully character that showed up, whose name escapes me right now. She shows up in later episodes, I think. Honestly, I can't remember if she's important to the story later down the line or not. Things go great, then they go not so great thanks to unforeseen consequences. Then Luz uses the Chekhov's gun and realizes that Eda's teachings might actually have some merit after all. I know it kinda sounds like I'm breezing through Luz's development in this episode, but it's less a development episode for her and more an establishment episode for other stuff. She gets plenty of good character work down the line, don't you worry, but here she's just kinda going through the motions. The most she learns is to just be resourceful, while everyone else learns that you can't dissect a living human. Anyway, first we meet Willow, who after a cute little bit of healing a flower, is treated to one of the most honey-laced vinegar bouts of passive-aggressive remarks by her fellow classmate, and experiences a rage-induced magical surge that nearly turns Luz into plant food before she gets a handle on herself. I like their meeting because it makes it look like Willow is about to go full carry on poor old hapless Luz, until she suddenly realizes what she's doing, backs off, and profusely apologizes. They aren't going with that one unfortunately prevalent trend of bully victims, and really most kind of victims, going off the rails after their bully pushes them too far and the narrative decrying them as a monster as a result of their snapping. I've never been a fan of that kind of narrative choice. Sure, it gives the implicit lesson of don't be such a rancid fucking shitheel to a person who has done nothing to you, but fumbles on the question of why not? The answer to why shouldn't you bully a person is not because they might have power you don't know about and will murder you and countless others if you keep pushing them. It's because bullying someone is a completely vile and nasty thing to do to a person for no tangible reason, you evil little turd. What's more is that by botching that lesson, it offers another implicit lesson that is just as tone-deaf and inappropriate. It suggests that bully victims are wrong for feeling anger towards their bullies and will go too far the moment they try to seek retribution. It's using that Nietzsche quote as a silencing tactic to indoctrinate people into believing that all victimized kids should just grin and bear it and not cause a fuss. We see this kind of shit in real life where bully victims are demonized for fighting back against the person that made their life a living hell, as though the people who are literally shooting up schools aren't some overly privileged white boys. That's the kind of shit that we get from this carry trope. Luckily, the Owl House doesn't go in this direction as Willow sees that Luz is caught in the crossfire of her rage and immediately stops and apologizes. See kids? Being angry about your bully doesn't make you a monster. And that's just one of the things that makes Willow great. She's curious, she's enthusiastic about new discoveries, she gives herself encouraging little pep talks in the woods, she's friendly to almost everyone, even plants, and her ears wiggle. Look at them! Look at how they wiggle!
Ah, Willow is so cute.
And her budding friendship with Luz is cute too. It's the first time we see anyone Luz's age that matches her energy. Sure, she more or less becomes a straight man for her and Gus later down the line, but that's not until the latter half of the season. Here they are just bouncing off each other in the most adorable way. So much so that I kinda wish Luz and Willow were the couple that the show was setting up for later down the line. Alas, it's clear, even through her character design, that Willow was never meant to be Luz's love interest. If she was, her eyes would be bigger. I'm sure there's a more articulate way to say that, but I didn't go to art school. Ask Ginger or Carousel to explain it to you because honestly, I'm just a hack. Real quick though, I'm a little perplexed by the whole half-a-witch Willow thing. At first I thought it was perhaps foreshadowing to a revelation where we find out Willow is biracial or something, where one of her parents is a witch and another is a non-magical species. But then we see Willow's parents later down the line and they appear to be the same witch species. So they really do just call her half a witch because she can't do abomination magic? When that name just sounds like eugenics shit? I don't know, it just seems a bit clunky to me. You can tell that I'm struggling to find actual criticism for the show when all I've had to go on so far are minor quibbles that only bug me. No matter, skip ahead and we meet Gus, Willow's friend and certified cryptid hunter. Sure, the cryptids are just humans in this world, but hey, Gus found a human, so he's already doing better than most in his field. I wish there was more I could say about Gus, but honestly, what you see with him is more or less what you get. He gets an episode of development later, but in terms of substance, that's pretty much it for him this season. You can argue that Gus works fine the way he is as a comic relief character, but regardless, I can't help but feel that one of the two best friends of the main protagonist should get a little more. I like Gus and I like what he brings to the table. I just wish there was more meat to him. Cause look at him, he needs more meat. He's so small. On to Principal Bump, who as early as his debut episode surprised me with how enjoyable he was. I don't think I've enjoyed a principal character this much since Skinner. He strikes this perfect balance of being too tired for everyone's shit and being a generally chill dude. Sure, he's set up as a secondary antagonist in this episode, but how is he supposed to know that you can't just dissect a living human? He's not in the Human Appreciation Society. But yeah, in this episode, we're introduced to his tendencies of being stubborn but not immovable. He only gets involved when he's led to believe that Willow is cheating, but when he finds out that her true talent comes in the form of plant magic, he doesn't even stay mad about the whole cheating thing and just switches her to the plant track. It's that demonstration of being open to reason that we don't see a lot of in faculty characters like this, and it becomes a staple of Bump's character. It makes him all the more enjoyable to watch in later episodes. But wait, there's a whole other plot in this episode to recount. While all this Hexside nonsense is happening with Luz, we get the first inklings of development with both Eda and King. We see them butting heads regarding the tenuous nature of Luz's apprenticeship and more or less competing for the right to be her teacher. Well, King competes for it at least. Eda just kinda kicks back in self-assurance before he gets it in her head that she's gone off somewhere else to learn, and then Eda goes off to find Luz at Hexside, thus concluding that she's failed as a teacher. It's an indication of just how deeply she despises the standardized education system in the Boiling Isles. Simply seeing Luz within Hexside's doors makes her feel utterly defeated. You can't help but feel for her, honestly. Sure, she wasn't taking her role as a mentor especially seriously, but she's certainly allowed to have issues with the school system regardless. Anyone who's had trouble in middle or high school thanks to their outdated standardized model can certainly see a bit of themselves in Eda, I'd think. We see more of this side of her in future episodes, as this one just more or less plants the seeds for her future development. But it's important to know that it's not her issues with Hexside in this episode that's her failing. Her failing comes from her nearly apathetic approach to being Luz's mentor. Sure, the lesson she imparted about being resourceful is what helped Luz at the end of the day, but she had to be pressed by Luz to impart any teaching at all before they diverted paths. At this point in the show, she's treated Luz more as an unpaid intern than as a pupil, and Luz was rightfully getting fed up with it. This wasn't a case of Luz being approached by demystifying reality and rejecting it. This was a case of Eda holding out on their deal and her apprentice losing her patience. It was this wake-up call that prompted Eda to take her mentorship over Luz more seriously in future episodes, although that is still something of a lengthy process. Also, we see that Eda still doesn't understand what hugs mean, but then we see Luz hug Willow and Gus just fine. So hugging isn't just a human thing that the Boiling Isles doesn't know about. Eda just flat out has never been hugged before. Considering everything we learn about Eda by season's end, this is just heartbreaking. Like, how can you not want to hug this poor woman who would deny her such a thing her entire life? What the fuck? I know I practically built this channel about gushing over Eda, and I've already done it more for this video than I needed to, but I can't really help it. She really does just speak to me as a character. I adore this woman, and I hate that we don't have more characters like her as the central focus in other stories. Also, I'm a filthy lesbian, so lay off. I mean, look at her. She's even stunning when she's surrounded by trash. Anyway, as I reluctantly divert our course, I suppose I should talk about King this episode. Short version is, he's adorable. Slightly less short version, we get to see a running trend where episodes even slightly focused on him tend to involve his insatiable power hunger, followed by near instant reprimands for his hubris. It is cute seeing him be so enthusiastic about becoming Luz's mentor in place of Eda, and that's a plot point we see in the very next episode. It's just a shame that his literal boneheadedness tends to get him in trouble more often than not. He gets a brief moment of catharsis where he wins the bet with Eda by default before the penance of his arrogance comes in the form of a 10-foot, 10-ton slug monster ready to eat him. Still, when all is said and done, he is willing and able to admit his own shortcomings, so he's never insufferable about the whole ordeal. In fact, he's so easily undone by his own hubris that you begin to wonder if he ever truly was the king of demons, or if that too was just a crock of shit alongside his paper crown. Or perhaps he was the king of demons and it was that very hubris that knocked him off his throne. Well, I'm certainly not going to try to answer that question today because that is way too close to theorizing for me and I'm not about to go down that rabbit hole. Anyway, stay tuned for the next and one of the most impactful episodes in the entire show. Toodles! Alright. Fine, I'll talk about Amity. Jeez. So alongside Willow, Gus, and Bump, we are also introduced to the alpha bitch Amity Blight. The character that everyone would go nuts for, even the show a little. I will say as a primary antagonist for the episode, Amity did her job very well, helped along by a killer performance by Mae Whitman. Seriously, that woman has considerable range. I didn't even know that was her until someone pointed it out to me. But yeah, she's a serviceable source of conflict for Luz and Willow this episode. She's condescending, she's territorial, she's weirdly uptight about not being the absolute best. Upon first viewing, she served her job well. With the context of the rest of the season, however, it's actually pretty commendable with just how careful they were with her character debut. I've gone on record saying that Amity's redemption story was a bit clunky with how much they did with her and Luz throughout the season, and that they likely would have been better off just picking a lane between making her a bully or a friend character. With hindsight, however, there are hints to where her character was going with this first outing of hers, those hints being the severity of her actions. When we first see her interacting with Willow, she is condescending for days, but she doesn't say anything particularly vile. The worst she does is call her half a witch, a name that could be interpreted as a slur, but apparently wasn't supposed to be. Yeah, I'm still stuck on this, Dana. Why the eugenics undertones? Later on, we see Amity getting really pissy, then going outright feral over the fact that Willow got her top student badge as a result of cheating. Amity's actions are bad this episode, but they aren't the worst. And with the context to the rest of the season to go by, we can see that all that was deliberate. Amity's actions towards Willow and Luz can't be positively vile and unforgivable because we have a whole character arc for her thought out and ready to go. If they started off with Amity up and just calling Willow garbage and being actively aggressive towards her, you know, like Basha, they would have compromised their entire experiment before it even began. Amity's actions in this episode and towards Willow in general are ones that require atonement, but they can be atoned for. Upon rewatch, I was actually surprised with just how careful Dana and the crew were with progressing Amity's character. I'm so used to redemption arcs going to the most vile of people that the nuances of this one threw me for a loop. Go figure, the most tired cliche of modern media and the Owl House still fucking does it leaps and bounds better than everyone else. God, I love this show. Okay, now we're done. Stay tuned for episode 4 where we jump headfirst into the first big one.